Mary O'Malley here again with the 5th video on my new book, What's in the Way is the Way. And so we have been exploring how our natural state is this openness to life. It is the ability to enter, to be at one with the great river of life. It's about discovering how to be life rather than do life. And we've explored that we knew this really well when we were young. We were just open to the great flow. And then we pulled ourselves up and out of our bodies and we got stuck. We got identified with this cloud bank of our heads. And that's where most people live all the day long. And it has a storyteller and it tells itself stories about itself and about others, and it likes this and it doesn't like that. And it causes great suffering in our lives. And so what we're getting ready to do is to look at how you can unhook from this storyteller so you can come back to life. But before we look at those skills, there's 3 important things in this chapter, chapter 4, I am not alone, that we need to look at. The first is that this storyteller is made out of spells, and I love the word spells. Because spells are something that's laid over the top of you, it's not true, and it can be lifted. And of course we don't have a lot of time on this video, so I want to just give you the 8 core spells, and it goes more in depth in the book. But the first spell we all take on is I am separate from life. That's like a cell in your heart saying I am separate from the heart. Yes, the cell has a life of its own, but it's a part of this greater being called the heart, which is part of this greater being called a body, which is a part of this greater being called life. But because we separate out from life, because we get caught in this storyteller that is separate, it leads to the second foundational spell, which is life is not safe. In other words, I must be afraid. I must manage life. And life is the safest thing you'll ever open to. And we'll be exploring that later on in the book. But right now I want you just to understand that these are the 2 foundational spells. Then that leads to what I call the 3 operational spells. And here's Bodhi again. He seems to know when I am doing these videos. Hi, big guy. And so the 3 operational spells, this is where most people live most all the time. And that is, now I've got to do life. In other words, I have to manage life, I have to control life. And I've got to do it right. And I'm not doing it right enough. That's where most people live, in this constant circle. I've got to do life, I've got to do life right, and I'm not doing it right enough. And that puts a veil between ourselves and life. And that leads to what I call the 3 hidden spells. And these are the spells that everybody has to a greater or lesser degree. I've worked with people for almost 30 years, and I can tell you honestly, it does not matter from what walk of life you come from, you have these spells. And the first hidden spell is, because I'm not doing it right, I am wrong. Because I am wrong, I am unlovable. And because I am unlovable, I am all alone. And most people are not even aware that these spells run them from underneath their everyday awareness. And they're also not aware that these spells are not true. There's something that's been laid over the top of them, and they can be lifted. And if you look at that last spell, which is the spell that most people are very afraid of, and really believe I am all alone because they're separate from life. If you take the word alone and separate it out, it's all one. So there's something that really happens for you when you begin to learn how to unhook from these spells. The second point in this chapter that's very important, which is the title of the chapter, You Are Not Alone. You just think you are. And because you are alone, you have to do life, and that separates you from life. And I think the best way to describe that you're not alone comes from Eben Alexander's journey and story. He wrote the book Proof of Heaven, and he's the neurosurgeon that taught at Harvard for many years and got spinal meningitis from the E. coli bacteria, and was in a coma for 7 days, and they even have CAT scans showing how his frontal lobe, what makes him a human being, was pus. It had been eaten by the E. coli bacteria. And before this experience happened, he was a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. He didn't think that love was the essence of life, and he didn't think that, he thought that consciousness began when the brain was born and it died when the brain was dead. But he didn't have a brain, and he was aware, and so he went on this journey, and he went to what a lot of people call heaven. But one of the core points he is offering us here is that heaven is not so much a place as it is what is everywhere, right here, right now. In fact, in the Newsweek article, he said that he just saw the level of existence as he left the denseness of this body-mind system. He saw the level of existence that both Einstein and Jesus saw. And Einstein saw this is all energy, and Jesus saw that it's all love. And so he was asked, what did you learn, when you went on this journey? And he said, well, it was the most real experience that I've ever had in my life, way beyond anything I've had while in this body. And he said, I don't think I can put it into words, but if I had to, the closest I could come to was, you are loved and cherished always. In other words, you're not alone. And the interesting question to ask is, what are you loved and cherished by? Well, in this chapter, we explore the word God. It's one of those words that has so many meanings to it. And I think what I want to offer here is that in our maturing as a species, we are beginning to move from God is a noun to God is a verb. And God is the beingness that is absolutely everything that both Einstein and Jesus saw. And that beingness is made out of love. That's why I love the Hafiz poem. He's a Persian poet. And one of my favorite poems of his is, even after all these years, the sun does not say to the earth, you owe me. Look what a love like that can do. It can light up the whole sky. So really understanding you're not alone brings you to the place that you eat love, you drink love, you breathe love, you're breathed by love. And so the question is, how do we make contact with that level of existence, the level that Evan saw when he left his body? And I pray and I meditate, but also I ask questions. Yes, we all ask questions of life. How much does it cost? When are you available? What are the directions? Very important questions for maneuvering through life. But one of the most important ways to use questions most of us do not have access to, and that is that the power is in the question itself. It's using questions not to look for an answer, but to actually ask life for clarity. And when you ask a question without looking for an answer, it sets things in motion. And you know what I mean. You can't remember somebody's name, and then you who was his name? And then a few minutes later, a few hours later, it pops up because you have set something in motion. And we're talking about using that on a much deeper level than asking names. We're talking about to ask life for guidance. And so that brings us to another point in this chapter, and that is your wisdom knowing. That within you, you have a knowing that knows exactly what needs to happen in every single moment of your life. But for most of us, we have retreated to our heads, and so this knowing is not very loud. It's a knowing. And yet we listen to the noise in our brains most all the time. But it's there. And one of the best ways I've ever described it is in my second book, The Gift of Our Compulsions. And it begins with a story about the house of your being. And imagine a beautiful house, light and doors and windows open, and this is where you live before you started taking on the cloud bank with your storyteller. And then slowly and surely you began to close the doors and close the curtains and lock parts of yourself in the room, and you retreated to the attic of your mind. And of course you have a DVD player up there, your storyteller, and you can do all sorts of stories about life, but you're no longer living life. And then if you're on the journey back to yourself, it is a journey of coming back into the house, freeing up these parts that you stored in the rooms, opening up the windows and the doors again, going down into the attic, freeing up those core things that have run you from underneath your everyday awareness, your fear, your loneliness, your confusion, your doubt, your anger, your despair. And as the basement of your being gets more cleared up, you see a circular room. And you're drawn to it. It's emitting a warmth, and you sit by it. And the walls of the room dissolve, and there is the wellspring of your own deep knowing, right there within you, that is with you absolutely every step of the way. So now that we have explored that we have been cut off from life by listening to this storyteller and trying to do life and do life right your whole life rather than be life, it is now time in the next video to begin to explore how do you see and dissolve these spells that make up that storyteller, so you can see through your cloud bank and come back to the living joy of being fully alive.